How do you do? It is I, Lord Pembleton III. Well, my viewers, anyway, repeating viewers, will know that I have recently cut my hair. Had my hair cut, not cut my hair. Anyway, basically, long story short, I went to the barbers and I gave them some instructions on how to cut my hair, and they completely ignored everything. It was not exactly a great experience, and I'm not very happy with the kind of service that was provided. So, safe to say, I won't be going back to the barbers anymore. So, it's going to be a quest to find new barbers later on in the future if I do get my hair cut. Anyway, let's get back onto the video. So, if you're looking at the title of this video, I want to give you a little bit of a tale. Today, one of the things I have been avoiding very much is being online, being on social media, and thankfully so. But I've basically just popped into YouTube for my short daily session, and from there I kind of saw that I saw that a new video was posted by my favorite cripple, Ricky Berwick, on Cripple News, and this kind of sparked a bit of a fascination with it. Of course, it's very entertaining from Ricky Berwick, poking kind of the fun at the situation that's happening. And for those of you who don't know what has happened, essentially, famous YouTuber Idubbbz and Ethan have had a little bit of a falling out and a little bit of spats. Of course, need some context if you don't know. Basically, Ethan from H3, who is has been on YouTube for quite a while. He has this podcast called the H3 podcast, where he essentially gets people to come on a show and talk about certain topics that might pique his interest. And Idubbbz, for those of you who don't know, is a famous YouTuber from the early days of the internet. Well, not too early, I think, say about 2011, 2012, around that sort of era, where he would do kind of crass videos, which of course I was very much a fan of viewing. And later on, he kind of decided to kind of change his content and his demeanor, which didn't really go too well with a lot of his fans, and also his way of kind of trying to transition from that did not go very well, which caused a lot of spats and schisms amongst his community. And he's been a little bit of a, well, let's be generous, a bit of a downward projection with his sort of YouTube career in general, I think it's safe to say. And the newest sort of drama between the two had to do with basically Ethan getting harassed by certain groups that Idubbbz was very chummy with. And from there on out, CPS was called on his children, which, of course, as a parent is absolutely mortifying and horrifying to hear. But also, as somebody who used to be a fan of Idubbbz's videos, it's also more horrifying to find out that he was, well, completely ignored, kind of turned a blind eye to that kind of harassment, and really basically try to make the people who are doing those kinds of things seem not as bad, which is very scary and very concerning. And I kind of want to touch on the topic of sort of radicalization over time, and I feel like Idubbbz is kind of a perfect situation where I do feel like he has been radicalized slowly over time. Back in his early videos, he used to be a very different person, had very different sort of views, where he kind of, gave very clear and rational, discussions and kind of looks into why he did the kind of things that he did, which, whether you agree with it or not, is much more, much more nuanced than the kind of views that he kind of projects nowadays, whether you agree with it or not, really. I think even if you do agree with currently his views and topics, you can kind of see that he's not really dealing with that quite well, and he's going about it quite a hypocritical way, because in my opinion, he's still doing the same kind of stuff that he was doing beforehand, with basically picking on certain people that he feels like it's agreeable to kind of pick on. but of course doing it with a different flair of, basically a political twist, which I feel like is very much a case of the radicalization of Idubbbz throughout time. And that's kind of one of the things that I want to touch. I don't really want to touch too much on Ian and or H3 as characters in this kind of video. Really, this is really much more of a kind of glimpse through and really a way to kind of see what we can learn from their situation. Now, of course, my personal views on politics is very simple. I believe that politics in its current form is nothing more than a tool to cause schisms between communities. And ultimately, its ultimate goal is to create tribal factions of indoctrinated individuals who ultimately basically battle it out to basically put up their one true ideology as the saving grace of humanity. Shut up. Despite all that, despite my personal thoughts and opinions, I think that if you are going to be politically minded, or if you're someone who does enjoy politics, or have a certain side that you support, I say more power to you. If you're one of those individuals that is rational and is not really, extremist in their views, or turns blind eye to sort of horrible actions that is unfavorable to that side's enemies, I think then each to their own. You're allowed to basically have your any kind of opinions that you have, really, but that's not really the case with, of course, Idubbbz. I think that his sort of indoctrination into political ideologies is very much a case that a lot of people experience. I know I personally have had a lot of friends who basically got sort of indoctrinated by politics and became extremely irrational, extremely hateful towards certain people, and I feel like that's going to be a common set for a lot of people nowadays, especially if you're alone. If you're very lonely, I think it's very easy to get indoctrinated by certain groups of people, whether those be the right, left, or some other ideologies in between those, or even past those. I think that it's a very dangerous thing, because at that point, it's no different than either tribal faction, cult, or really a kind of dogma that you follow in general at that point. And you kind of have to learn from past mistakes. I feel like a good example is someone like Christian, the world, the YouTube's the internet's most famous lolcow, really the first lolcow that was published on the internet, and of course when looking at their sort of situation, you can see that he made a lot of mistakes that, of course, led to his, mental state declining and him getting harassed and bullied. If you kind of learn mistakes from those kinds of people, I think it's very beneficial. And of course, when looking at sort of Idubbbz's whole outlook and ideology, I think that's also something that can be picked apart and kind of observed at a closer lens. I think it's beneficial for people to do that. So the next thing to kind of touch upon first, when kind of picking apart sort of the mistakes of Idubbbz, is really talking about prevention. Really, what could have been done to kind of make him, that could have prevented him from kind of getting to these sort of radical ideas. And the first thing I'd think is sort of his sort of transition from doing the kind of content that he used to do beforehand. Now, I don't personally think there's anything wrong with his original wish to kind of move away from the kind of content that he was producing. Of course, maybe perhaps he didn't really like it. Maybe he didn't like to produce this kind of content that he was working. Maybe he did feel that his original content was quite hurtful, quite distasteful. I'm not really here to judge that. If you're allowed to have your opinions, but a lot of people might kind of say that, if he stayed the old Idubbbz making the same kind of content that he used to, then ultimately he wouldn't have reached this kind of situation. And I disagree on that. I think that it was fine for him to kind of move away from it. After all, YouTube was also changing landscape during this time, so around 2014, 2015. And I don't think there was anything kind of wrong about him stepping away, moving away from the kind of content that he was producing beforehand. Of course, people like Max Mofo and Anything for Views, they did their own thing, and they seemed to be quite successful. They kind of transitioned away from making their old content, which was quite crass, which, so you can argue is still kind of crass, but it definitely is a lot much more lighter than the stuff that they were producing before. Likewise, Ian, I don't think there was anything wrong really with him changing his kind of content, especially in the changing ecosystem of the internet at the time. But it's kind of how and really what was replaced with that, because he was kind of demonizing his old content and really demonizing his viewers, his fan base that he kind of cultivated and really let out. And one of the things that you can easily tell was during that time he was very much blinded to what he was saying, what he was kind of projecting. He was making everybody else out to be the bad guy, while also trying to make it in the guise of him being the ultimate bad guy that needs to change his ways. And if you were basically one of those people who were, of course, liked his old content and didn't like his new content, then the very simple message was bugger off. You're a horrible person. And that was kind of what was presented to everyone. But Ian himself, Idubbbz, did not see it that way. And, he was making himself out to be very, trying to change his ways, becoming much more emotional, being much more empathetic, but he wasn't. And his content didn't really change all that much in terms of what it was doing, because his content was still making fun of people, still making fun of sort of pathetic people, but it's just that the pathetic people that he was making fun of were, of course, people that had a different sort of ideology, had a different kind of cultural perception at the time. He did not change his content to basically be much more positive out, because it wasn't positive. It was still quite hateful, especially like he was making fun of quote unquote sad lonely people on the internet, which it doesn't show that you're doesn't show that you're empathetic, doesn't show that your content has really changed all that much. And afterwards, basically some stuff happened with his partner at the time, and she got into a lot of hot waters, especially with a certain individual named Sam Hyde. And of course she got a lot of hate messages, and that kind of trickled off to him, and he did not do a good job of kind of presenting everything. Really, I understand that, of course, if you love someone, you always want to protect them, but you also have to remember that it really depends on their actions as well, and you have to kind of show some tough love when those kinds of things happen, because ultimately it's not good for either party to be, trying to support bad behavior. And that was kind of what his partner was kind of accumulating over time, and she did not really do a good job of presenting herself on the internet. And he kind of, tried to make the situation better, but ultimately made it worse. And I think that was kind of where he sort of started to kind of, perhaps, this is of course just assumptions. Don't take everything what I'm about to say with a bit of a grain of salt, of course. I think that was kind of when he started to kind of get much more into the idea that, these people are against me. There's this huge issue that is being present. Perhaps if I, support my partner, and of course try to kind of be with the kind of people that she likes and kind of grow this community that I'm now wanting to kind of champion for, then everything will be much better, and I can move away from this, these kind of toxic landscape that I have, created for myself. And that's a very dangerous thing to get down of, because then after that you're going to kind of be more supportive towards certain actions that on the face of it is not that great. And of course, during that time he was also very, let's just say, emotionally vulnerable. He was dealing with a lot of emotions, and of course he was having a lot of episodes where he presented himself as being someone who has just now awoken to being empathetic. But again, the actions don't reflect that change, and what he was spreading much more of was a lot more sort of toxic, still doing the same kind of toxic content, but again, just in a different way. But this time it was a lot more malicious, and of course, this is what I mean. Like, one of the things I will always say is that when you get sort of indoctrinated, or you you get kind of groomed and manipulated to having certain opinions, the issue is you are not always aware that those things are happening. You're not always aware that you are slowly being radicalized. And that's with anyone, especially if you're in a very vulnerable state. And of course, it's safe to say that Idubbbz during that time was very vulnerable, and it's sad, and that's kind of where majority of the problems came out. Of course, he picked a fight with Sam Hyde, who, is, whether you love him or hate him, was easily a lot more intelligent than Ian, and that was kind of very much present when he kind of fooled Ian multiple times with some of his content, where Ian tried to, of course, much in his, again, I'll say his hypocritical ways, tried to create a hit piece on Sam Hyde. Didn't really work, and that kind of, and instead Sam Hyde kind of was playing a game of chess where he was 20 steps ahead of Idubbbz, and that kind of was definitely quite a critical blow to himself, and kind of perhaps even his ego, and that kind of left a lot of schisms between his actions, what would later happen, where he would again be very sort of critical against Sam Hyde and show that he was very much very emotionally vulnerable to a lot of people, which you don't want to really do, especially on the internet. Another thing that happened shortly afterwards is he kind of started to talk to people that were outside of his kind of community, and perhaps certain groups of people that were perhaps much more unrepresented. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I think that's actually good. It's always good to see representations of certain groups of people. But you also have to be careful, because not everybody of a certain group or certain representation is indicative of certain, what their groups and their culture kind of stand for. And, of course, I can't really vouch for what happened, because I didn't really keep very much close to that arc of certain things, but from the small things that I've seen, he was talking to certain people that were, in my opinion, of a radical mindset, that were part of that, perhaps minority group, and that's also very dangerous. And on the internet, we are kind of shown that a lot of people of certain groups and certain cultures can be, of course, very hurtful and very distasteful to the average person. But really, I think it's good to kind of observe different cultures and different groups of people and different mindsets, different communities, but also be careful with who we kind of communicate with, because that can not only present us with certain ideas that might be very much, very distressing to somebody who's not very, you know, that might be very distressing to certain groups of people who might already have preconceived notions, preconceived vulnerabilities of certain groups, but also that gives us a negative view on certain people and certain groups. Of course, this is very much something that is always provided by the media, where it shows certain groups as being, good, bad, and I don't think it's, and they typically pick a small sample size of people to view from. I think realistically, if you're going to be doing that kind of stuff, you need to, expand your horizon of certain people and certain groups. And I don't think Idubbbz was probably in the right state to kind of talk to some people, especially if they were radicalized or had radical views. So again, it's good to engross yourself with certain cultures and kind of observe them, but also be well aware that not everybody of a certain group or certain culture is the norm, and not all of those people have very sanitary and very beneficial ideologies that you can sort of integrate into your own. I think you need to have a large groups of people, and have people who have also different views from them, and kind of see what goes around. Really, the last thing I want to touch upon, I think one of the most important things I want to touch upon, is once you are indoctrinated to certain ideologies and certain groups, certain actions might be too much to kind of rationalize and really agree with. So a lot of the time, it might be much more easier for that individual to kind of look away from certain actions. Now, of course, I'm not gonna defend H3 too much, because, to be honest, a lot of sort of his stuff was brought on by himself, and I think, hopefully anyway, he can kind of see that. But I think that some of the stuff that was being done to him, especially for the kind of space that he was having, was very unfair, and I think those people had the mentality of, well, I'm going to do this really evil thing, and it's going to be for the greater good. There's no cost too high to pay to have my ideology supported, and this was very much present in the events that were, that happened to H3, and regardless of how you feel about the guy, I think the bare minimum you can say is that what happened to him was not fair, and it's very scary, because it kind of shows you that these people are willing to do extremely horrible things to people that they don't really agree with politically. And Ian was definitely on the forefront of that, sort of being a champion for those people. And sort of the damage that he was doing, he tried to minimize by kind of spreading a really screwed up sense of positivity, where he got everybody to kind of basically, all the people that were harassing him, to say that, oh, hey, Ethan, we really care about you, we think you're great. And none of them had any accountability for what had happened. Nobody had any kind of sympathy for what was happening to him. And Ethan, I think, deep down kind of knew that. And this is kind of another thing I want to touch upon. This kind of positivity in itself is not beneficial. It's only when certain criteria are made that it is beneficial, and not all the time what you're saying is it kind of comes across the way you kind of perceive it. And I'm not really here to kind of say that that part was uncalled for, or it was a horrible thing that Ian did, because I'm not entirely sure. All I'm going to say is that for what was happening to H3, I don't think that was, very very called for, and I think it's very inappropriate, especially given the topic of what was happening to him. Now, of course, Idubbbz never talked about any of that stuff. He was basically just made Ethan out to have a harmful idea, harmful thoughts, harmful ideology, and his actions were extremely hypocritical, and he cherry picked certain things to make it seem that all what was happening to Ethan Klein was just water on the bridge, not just something that he decided to take out because he liked power. And I'm not really gonna. I don't know, but I don't know H3 that well. I don't know what it was, but that's really screwed up, and it really, it's really dangerous to have that, to spread that kind of idea, because then it seems like, because then the kind of people that were doing all those really horrible things have now just gotten more ammunition to sort of do what they will, really. And that's another thing you have to kind of watch out for, is one of the things that you can kind of see and kind of hold on to is if you ever feel like wondering if you are radicalized, if you are dangerous. I think the easiest thing to say was, if my side did, cold CPS on someone who has kids who, you don't really know the situation, and ultimately they had their children taken away, well, does the fact that he disagrees with me justify doing those horrible things to him? People, either groups of people. I'm not even here to dog on Ian or Idubbbz. I think where he's going, he's not going down a good path. I think he is doing quite hurtful, quite harmful things, but he is ultimately, I don't think he's able to see that anymore. I think really a lot of his thoughts and ideas have become very much radicalized by certain people in his life. I don't want to see anyone get radicalized. It's absolutely scary when you see it happening in front of you. And really, my greatest hope is that perhaps this video might be able to, of course, prevent people from getting radicalized. I think if you don't at least watch this video, at least do watch certain the videos that have kind of come from, let's say, Ricky Berg's channel, or anybody who kind of covers the entire content, but don't focus too much on lambasting on either group, or kind of because at that point you're not really doing anything. I think really just watching it and kind of taking away the actions that were conducted by the groups can kind of be learned from, and I think I really encourage people to do that. Anyway, well, this is Lord Pembleton, and I will say goodbye to everyone. I care about you, although I don't know you, and please don't form any parasocial relationships with anybody that you see online, including me, because, well, let's be honest, that's also another good way to get radicalized by people. Anyway, bye everyone.